he's fixing to tell me something, and I'm pretty sure I'm not gonna like it.
Most fans remember the Discovery show Fast and Loud for its incredible car builds and the fun camaraderie between its two stars, Richard Rawlings and Aaron Kaufman.
I think I've got some other things, some other cats I want to skin, some other things I want to get into.
When Aaron left the show in 2018, fans were shocked. As one of the company's main pillars, most wondered if something had happened between Richard and Aaron, which caused Aaron to leave the show and garage. There have been tons of rumors of what did and didn't happen, and even Richard and Aaron have been tight-lipped about the details. But now the truth of what really went down is finally coming out, and it's nothing like you ever could have expected. During an interview with Art of Gears, Aaron finally revealed why he had chosen to leave the show. As someone who was both a mechanic and an artist, the demands from the producers on the show were too much for him. The show's episodic nature required the team to find and rebuild a car every episode. Now, that might not seem too bad, except Aaron was putting in 100+ hours every week trying to finish the cars. He'd end up falling asleep at the shop and even showering with the hose in the back. There are even a few episodes where you can clearly see Aaron is totally exhausted and about to fall asleep. A lot of the pressure of finishing the builds was entirely on his shoulders. He was the lead mechanic. Because the producers insisted on fast builds, the team had to do everything in their power to meet their deadlines. That often meant going without sleep and not being able to go home. Eventually, that sort of pressure and exhaustion became too much for Aaron. He prefers a slower pace, which allows him to really get to know the car and plan the build stage by stage. As an artist too, he had his own creative ideas. The producers didn't always like them. Aaron in particular loved working on Ford trucks, but the show always catered to small cars, often hot rods and other sports cars. While Aaron didn't have a problem working on these cars, they weren't exactly his passion either. Creatively, he felt stifled and unheard. He was basically told what to do and he'd have to do it. This might surprise fans because as the lead mechanic, it's easy to think that Aaron had some say about what cars the garage worked on. This wasn't the case. The choice was down to Richard and the producers. I think it's easy to understand why there might have been some frustration brewing there. Aaron had all these ideas and the show wasn't letting him really show off his brilliance. In the interview with Art of Gears, that's basically what Aaron claims is the reason he left. He wanted to do big builds and work with bigger cars. The show did not, but that wasn't the only motivating factor that forced Aaron to call it quits on the show. There were some personal problems between him and Richard too. Now, Aaron keeps things classy. During the interview, he says he just had some professional and personal problems come up, but I think it's easy to tell that there was some bad blood between him and Richard, and that comes down to how Richard discussed Aaron's departure from the show. After Aaron left in 2018, Richard went on the Gas Monkey Garage blog to discuss Aaron's choice to leave. He said that the garage, which is the focus of the Fast and Loud show, existed before Aaron. He also doubled down on saying that the garage was about a team and not just one person. Richard has also publicly said it was sad to see Aaron leave. The decision even came out of left field and he wasn't expecting it. But I think what he says in the blog post also suggests that the departure wasn't that clean. Richard said that he likes to keep drama away from the camera and won't talk badly about Aaron or the situation. This seems like a classy way to handle Aaron's departure, except Richard said something later that shed some light on the kind of guy he is. D Magazine pulled a quote from Richard that revealed just how he saw his relationship with Aaron. Basically, he saw Aaron as an employee. The camaraderie everyone saw on the show may have been partially authentic, but Richard only ever saw Aaron as an employee and not a friend. He also stated that the two didn't hang out after work. They just worked together. And Aaron also talked about how Richard's view of people played a factor in his decision to leave. G Magazine quoted Aaron as saying that how he saw and spoke to people differed from how Richard saw and spoke to people. I think it's easy to say that Aaron talked to people like they were friends. Richard talked to people like they were employees. He only saw them as people he employed to do the things he wanted them to do. So when an employee wanted to try something different, he wasn't having it. It's also likely that Aaron was hopeful that Richard would stand up for him against the producers. When Aaron wanted to work on a bigger project, he may have thought that Richard would have had his back. After that didn't pan out, it's likely that Aaron realized he and Richard weren't as close as he thought they were, or that Richard was more interested in the show's direction than allowing someone who has worked for him for 14 years to try something new. There was a professional and personal imbalance between the two men. Instead of letting the situation fester even more, Aaron chose to leave. Now, Aaron and Richard aren't the only two who have discussed Aaron's departure. Craig Kaufman, the Fast and Loud producer, released a quote about why Aaron had left. He said that the partnership between Aaron and Richard had basically run its course, that Aaron had reached the point where he wanted to go off and do new things. Craig isn't entirely wrong, and he's likely trying to be diplomatic for the show's sake, but he was also part of the problem. If Craig, as one of the producers, had allowed Aaron to have a build he wanted to do now and then, there's a chance that Aaron would have stuck around for longer. There's no question that Aaron's departure hurt the show. While the ratings did tank, allowing the show to continue on until 2020, the seasons following Aaron's departure weren't ideal, but there was likely some desperation on Richard and Craig's part to keep the fans happy and tuning in each week, even without the fan favorite being around. Aaron's love of cars and understanding of them also likely put him at odds with Richard. While Richard knows a few things about cars, he's ultimately a salesman. Aaron has even described him as such. As someone who deeply knows cars, Aaron likely found it difficult to share the craft with someone who was just a showman. Richard appears a bit two-faced with how he handled the situation. On the one hand, he's saying that he's sad that Aaron left and he was completely surprised, and on the other, he's saying the garage isn't about one person and that Aaron was basically an employee. Anyway, Aaron may have seen Richard as someone who uses people for his own gain, and he didn't want to be used anymore. Considering the tension between the two men, you may wonder if Richard and Aaron ever healed the rift between them. It's difficult to say if they're still friends, since one of them doesn't even think they had a friendship. After splitting from Fast and Loud, Aaron went on to star in other shows about cars. He also started his own fabrication business for Ford trucks. Aaron has also devoted much of his time to racing and building trucks for racing companies. Richard has focused on producing other car-focused shows too, but the two men haven't worked on the same project since Fast and Loud. It's likely they decided to remain cordial with one another and just keep out of each other's spaces. If Fast and Loud or a variation of it ever returns, it's unlikely Aaron will return. What do you think about the falling out between Richard and Aaron? Was it right for Aaron to leave? Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments below.